Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. This morning, what we're going to be discussing is going to be more of a psychological palate cleanser than your regular briefing. It won't be long, but it will be strong. Yes, we'll get back to putting our collective foot 10 inches up the behinds of the white supremacists and bootlicks, but I want to set the right tone for the resumption of our regular posting by putting a personal challenge to each of you, and that is to stop coping. Now, by that, I don't mean stop persevering. I mean to stop confusing apathy with being unrattled. Today's Moment of Truth has been inspired by recent events, but it's also been inspired by a long-standing malady that we haven't faced head-on, and it's long past time we did it. Look, whether the subject be reparations, building our own economy, a code of conduct, or anything else, we have to learn to accept when we're making progress and to be honest with ourselves about when we're not. It's a fact that when you have a people who have been oppressed for a long time and who have not been in control of their own lives, they develop defense mechanisms. And one of the most unfortunate is that they come up with coping mechanisms. Coping helps you feel better about not being able to push back against your circumstances, but coping also helps you feel better about not doing anything about it either. People who refuse to admit when they've taken an L are also a people who won't care how many L's they take. We have to be honest about our circumstances so we can take control of them and ultimately change those circumstances. One of the ways to put people on a treadmill is to convince them to feel better about the fact that they're not getting anywhere. Political prostitutes and these pork chop preachers have used this psychological jujitsu against us since forever, and they have successfully preyed on us. We are the most oppressed people in human history, and the result of that is that we have more losses than wins. But the answer to that circumstance isn't to retreat into denial. It's to take a step back, do some strategic assessments, and fix this mess. But that means you gotta let go of the cope. Yes, coping may be comforting, but only if you're not winning. People who win don't need to cope. It's the people who are mistreating them who get stuck with that one. Take, for example, Brown Chapel AME Church. Mike the Bigot Bloomberg came to town, and the pastor of that church actually allowed him to speak to the congregation. Now, you had a lot of black folks in that church who were coping hard with the main cheerleader for stop and frisk being allowed into their midst, into their church by their own pastor. But there were several black people there who stood up and turned their backs on Bloomberg. No excuses. And what happened next? Bloomberg was forced to drop out of the presidential race after that humiliation, and the white media was forced to cope non-stop with this development. Just like that, the black parishioners went from coping with a bad situation to making the bad guys do the coping. But understand something, coping isn't how you win, it's how you whine. Coping is a fact of life, but only a fool tries to make it into a way of life. And if you're doing more coping than you are winning, then something is very wrong with the circumstance you're in, and it needs to be fixed post-haste. People who pursue excellence tend to focus on their failures and defeats, because excellence requires you to get rid of those factors. If you want to be mediocre, then just focus on your successes. And if you want to be a failure, then don't focus on success or defeat. Just try to rationalize it away by saying that it's all been victories, more or less. At the very least, a learning experience, right? Now, trying to take refuge inside a fantasy world makes the person in denial feel better, but your children cannot eat off of that. The black baby boomers, yeah, we're going there. They made a religion out of coping. Typically, they try to hide it behind Bible verses, New Age mumbo-jumbo, anything to be able to say that a rapidly deteriorating situation isn't as bad as it looks. And every black generation since, from Generation X all the way up to Gen Z, have suffered for this. Coping is a luxury for those who won't suffer the consequences of that denial of reality. And it's also the last refuge for those who don't care whether they survive or not. They'll just tell themselves they did their best and pretend as if they actually did. It's one thing to not allow a setback or a defeat to make you lose your heart. It's another thing entirely to make a lifestyle out of giving excuses for a situation that is out of control and needs to be brought back under control. I'm keeping this morning's briefing brief because I want you to dwell on this. Become the voice that rejects and repudiates coping. Be the one who calls it out in your own particular circle. Part of taking control of the social discourse in our community means that we establish a culture that pushes back against loser behavior and loser speech. How we deal with defeat and setbacks is every bit as important as how we deal with victories. Our focus simply must change. We can't afford to be a group of people practicing how to cope. Instead, we must make the change to becoming a people who practice how to conquer. Good day, and be one.